welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us here today on this Friday. It's hard to believe it is Friday, and we got a snowstorm coming in here in southern Alberta. We will take all the moisture that we can get. We got a lot of stuff to talk about here today. We're going to kind of do something a little bit different, a little bit unique. I do not have a guest booked, and so I'm going to pull a bit of a rabbit out of my hat. And I am going to play for you today three clips. I separated parts of the discussion that I had with Jim Carr, who is special representative to the federal government for the prairies. And there's three things that I think he really mentioned that I think I really want to get in front of you here today. But first, I want to mention that we can still take your questions and your comments, and it's kind of a bit of a freestyle Friday here on the show. What we're going to do is if you want to participate, all you have to do is enter your question or comment in the box, whether you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or at realagriculture.com/live. And I'm right there with you, Lara. It is completely, I heard around Calgary is a bit of a snow globe. I heard Blackie is like a whiteout. It's kind of moving south, so it'll get to us here at the Lethbridge Studios, I'm sure, very, very soon. Viren says, my claim to fame is having the same hat as Shaun. Yeah, so hey, listen, if you participate in today's show and kind of help bail me out of this fact I got to hold this half hour by myself, I'll send you a hat. So see, look how good these look. Pretty swanky, pretty nice. And I appreciate everybody that some of the people that have got them have been tweeting about them and showing them off. So they are pretty awesome. Danny says, stay home, y'all. Yeah, the roads are not going to be very, very good. I was supposed to go to Calgary tonight, and we've already canceled our trip. So as I did mention, actually, you know what? First, before I get to these clips, I want to read you a piece of feedback. This was an email I got based on a RealAg Live episode that we did. Was it last week or the week before? I can't remember. It is an email here from Ron, and it's about the interview that I did with Andrea Strovi-Sawa. And she's a great friend of mine. She's a feed yard out by Tabor. Andrea has run this custom lot, ship wheel feeders. And what she also does is she's really passionate about regenerative agriculture. So she does a lot of rotational grazing. And I know I'm not supposed to say rotational grazing. She has another name for it, but I can't remember what she calls it. But she does a lot of cool stuff. Andrea is, I think, a really, really great person doing some awesome stuff with her family operation. Her and her dad worked really, really hard on succession, and that's gone very, very well. You can find that episode at realagriculture.com/live. But here's the email from Ron. Ron says, a few days ago, I had the fortunate opportunity to watch the interview in its entirety. One of the best ag interviews I have ever watched. An extremely sharp business manager as a grain farmer and with fed cattle in a custom lot. I personally found the interview very interesting and informative. It was great to see how the custom lot owner views things from their side. Thanks. Really, really appreciate that email, Ron. And Lindsay has reminded me, managed adaptive grazing. So there you go. Got some smart people around us here at Real Agriculture that actually remember the details that matter. Okay, let's get to my interview with Jim Carr. And first of all, I want to say I really appreciate him agreeing to do the interview. Okay, so I will admit that, we do talk to the Minister of Agriculture, Marie-Claude Bebeau, as much as we can. It can be difficult to get cabinet members outside of agriculture. They want you to talk to ag all the time because we're an ag media company. But there's a lot of issues that touch agriculture outside of the traditional agricultural portfolio. And so my wife, Trish, had emailed Jim Carr's office and said, you're representative for the prairies. Would you be interested in talking to Real Agriculture? And to be quite honest, Jim's assistant stepped up right away. And so it was great to have Minister Carr on RealAg Radio, which was on Tuesday. And we recorded it via video so we can show it for you here today. And one of the places that we started as the special representative for the prairies, there's a lot of issues to talk about with him as he takes these prairie issues back to, as he calls them, the center of government to talk about them. One of the things we talked about was energy policy. And recently we saw the Keystone Pipeline that was canceled. As expected, we're seeing Alberta Premier Kenney push back pretty hard, threatening compensation. They're going to maybe possibly take the U.S. government to court, saying that, hey, we invested $1.5 billion based on the assurity this thing would get built. And we'll see how that works out. There is some, I would say, skeptical people in terms of their ability to be successful in all of that. But let's listen to the first clip with Mr. Jim Carr and what he thinks about Keystone being canceled and what it possibly means for North American energy policy. Here's the first clip. You mentioned you were energy minister, and you were right in the thick of the purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Of course, the past couple of weeks we've had some very, very poor news. I would say expected news on the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline. How big of a setback is that for Western Canada?
Well, it's a big disappointment. We've been supporters of the pipeline from the very beginning. Before Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister, he went to the United States and in front of a Democratic audience supported Keystone XL. I happen to have been Minister of Natural Resources when the Obama administration pulled the plug on KXL. Very disappointing day. And it was deeply disappointing to experience it all over again with the Biden administration. I believe that there is enormous potential for a North American energy strategy. If you just look at an overhead of the interconnections between Canada and the United States, the pipelines, the hydroelectric interties, the supply chains that are so embedded in an integrated continental system, and now that we have an American administration that is also interested in a meaningful climate plan, I think there's just tons of potential for us to move forward. But don't get me wrong. That decision was impactful, hurtful for many families in Alberta and, in fact, across the country. And I'm not happy about it. The government wasn't happy about it. But we will move on and build on the alignment that we feel we enjoy with the United States and use the natural and human resources we share to move on to the next chapter.
I'm encouraged by the idea of a North American energy strategy, but with the current politics at play, do you think that could actually involve oil and gas, or does it only involve green energy?
No, I think it has to involve oil and gas. I mean, we're a long way away from the day when oil and gas isn't important. And North American energy security is a major priority for governments in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And if you look at the percentages of what we export that goes to the United States, what the United States imports coming from Canada, the link between the workers who make all this happen, no, I think there's every reason to be optimistic, especially now that you've got the willingness of an American administration to move this forward in ways that align with Canada's climate goals. I happen to have been Minister of Natural Resources when we signed a tripartite agreement that laid the foundation for a North American energy strategy with my American and Mexican counterparts. I know that Minister O'Regan is well briefed on the file and is very keen to move it forward.
So some interesting things to unpack there based on what Minister Carr said. And right off the top, he had the same lines that we've heard from the Prime Minister in terms of, hey, we're deeply disappointed. I'll editorialize, and I'm not sure there's a lot of Canadians that were really, really surprised. I found his answer or his commentary on where oil and gas fits into that to be a little bit more emphasized than maybe I would have initially thought. I think it has to involve oil and gas in terms of this future for North American energy policy. We know this for one, that the fact that it is a Biden administration, not a Trump administration in the U.S., has completely given Prime Minister Trudeau a lot of cover when it comes to the things that he wants to do on climate. Now, I'm sure that for some Canadians, when they hear Mr. Carr say, now, of course it involves oil and gas, there probably is a bit of a rolling of the eyes because this government's they've had some troubles. They've had some struggles when it comes to convincing Canadians they are committed to the oil and gas sector. Having said that, they did spend over $4 billion on a pipeline, TMX, that looks like it is going to get built, whether that's on the timeline that they think. It is in construction. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it's some mixed messages, and it is one of those examples of where Prime Minister Trudeau is trying to cut a really wide swath politically. He's trying to assure Canadians on the right that, listen, I believe in oil and gas, but he's also trying to play to some of the party that think it's insane that Canada would ever build another pipeline, period. One of the things that we do know coming out of the Keystone cancellation is, and we hear this in agriculture all the time, we need to diversify our exports. And, Canada's agricultural exports are quite diversified when you compare it to the energy sector. Huge majority of Canada's energy exports go to the U.S., and our number one customer has said, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if we actually do want some of your Canadian energy. So it is a bit of a mixed bag. I mentioned the alignment with the U.S. Big concern out of states like North Dakota about all of this in terms of jobs. Jobs lost on both sides of the border when you really look at it. It is really going to require. This is one of those topics where I think the Canadian government is really going to have to prove what they're saying to big supporters of the oil and gas sector, because I do detect a bit of some eye rolling when it does come to that. And like I said earlier, Premier Kenney plans to sue the U.S. government for compensation. They invested $1.5 billion. Some would say, based on a hope, a whim, and a prayer, and a political bet that Trump would win the last U.S. election back in November. But that bet has not necessarily paid off very, very well. If you have any thoughts about what you heard there from Jim Carr in terms of energy policy, please, I would comment, and I'll put some of them up for sure. Viren has commented that he really hopes we do not talk about solar panels today. Well, that may come up in the next clip, Veer, and I can't make any sort of promises. Where Jim Carr and I went next is I had to ask him about the carbon tax. There was no way I was going to let him off the hook from talking about the carbon tax, because this is a big issue for not only Western Canadian farmers, but just people who live in Western Canada in general. Farmers have been asking for an exemption when it comes to things like their costs on grain drying. There is not a substitute. The substitute for grain drying is don't grow crops like corn and wheat in some of these geographies. Now, maybe that's what the federal government wants. I'm not really sure. I don't think so. I'm just not quite sure they've necessarily thought through the whole exercise. But I did ask Mr. Carr about the carbon tax, the fact it is going to be going to $170 a ton by 2030. And as the special representative of the prairies, what exactly was he going to do about it? Let's watch clip number 2. The carbon tax, I would be amiss if I didn't bring that up. That's a huge issue on the prairies, especially with farmers across the 3 provinces. There's been big requests for exemptions on some items like grain drying. It is really kind of fallen on deaf ears, so to speak. What is your message back to the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister on the cost load that this carbon tax presents to farmers?
It's an issue, and it's an issue that I believe has to be revisited. The carbon tax we call a price on pollution, and we know that it's revenue neutral to the Government of Canada. For every dollar that's raised through that price on pollution is redistributed to families. And in those cases where there are inequities, I think we have a responsibility to look at those inequities. And I understand the arguments that are being made, and I'm presenting these arguments to the center of the government, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the cost increased by 2030 to $170 a ton, I think, was some big time sticker shock for the industry. There is some estimates of, even in Ontario, which is outside the prairie region, of course, but some estimates in Ontario of grain drying costs being at $40 an acre at that point. without a substitute. It's not like you can switch from your gasoline powered car to an electric car to reduce your carbon load. In some of these cases, there is no substitute.
Yeah, I think that we have a responsibility to look at it to see where there is real hardship, to assess the impact on their bottom line in real time and in real dollars. So to measure the impact of that fiscal measure and to conclude whether or not we believe it's fair, and if it's not, then to look at ways to mitigate the impact. It's my job to make the arguments. Ultimately, others will make the decisions, but I hear loudly and clearly from prairie producers.
As I try to shut my cell phone off. Interesting there. I'm hearing loud and clear. It is my job to take it to the center of government. So this is an example of, I think, because I think Mr. Carr was sincere. And listen, some of you may roll your eyes to that. I believe he was sincere in this because he wanted to move on to a different topic. Listen, I am going to take it to the government. That's the sense that I got from him. Now, the question is, and you've heard me put it this way with the federal ag minister before, Mr. Carr is the special representative of the prairies. Does that mean that he is a liaison from the prairies to the government or from the government to the prairies? Now, the way that he put that, he is going to take this to the center of government. When he says he's taking it to the center of the government, he is talking about taking it directly to the PMO's office. There's a difference between Minister Bourbeau and Minister Carr. Mr. Carr he's been around the block. He is a veteran of this government, okay? This is coming from a little bit more of an experiential weight point of view. He has been the trade minister. He has been the energy minister. So he's been trusted with some pretty key roles. And I think that I found him to be sincere in this. So I was encouraged. I remember in my interview earlier this week with Mary Robinson, I think it was on Tuesday on this show, I threw this out to her and she was like, really? Like, surprised, right? I think that it's going to, we'll see what comes of it. And as he said, it's up to others to, being the PMO, to see if they're actually going to do something about it. Lindsay says carbon tax is revenue neutral to government. Does that not mean it doesn't have cost, nor that it doesn't cost individuals or farms greatly? Isn't it? So basically, when he says that, is he not talking about how all the money that comes in is also the money that goes out in these rebates? And I have really had a hard time getting my head wrapped around these rebates. Like, if we collected the tax, would it make not? I would understand it more if that money was then put into funding technologies and innovation, so that eventually we didn't have to tax people because we had the tools available to us to fight some of these challenges that we have in terms of the climate. But in this case, we're just taking all the money and we're just giving it out to voters and saying, hey, look, here's some money for you. It feels kind of odd, and I don't understand it, to be honest with you, Lindsay, really at all. Question here, Danny, why couldn't the ag minister brought this to the cabinet? Well, she did. She legitimately did, and I think honestly, this idea on the grain dryer exemptions, Danny, absolutely went completely nowhere. And I'm assuming she also talked to the PMO about it. And at the time, we were getting word that people like Finance Minister Bill Morneau were not really that excited about this, that it was going kind of nowhere. Mark Davis says it's just not in the West. It's a huge cost for grain drying and barn heating in Ontario also. Absolutely, Mark. Absolutely agree with you. I think the grain drying topic actually probably has a little bit more emphasis in Ontario because of all the corn. Of course, Manitoba, big on corn as well. Wheat gets dried in places like Saskatchewan and Alberta. So it's really kind of confusing on what we're actually trying to accomplish here. The carbon tax is meant to deter people, to get them to lower their carbon load and think about greenhouse gas emissions. But the reality is there has to be a substitute. It's not like going, like I said, from your diesel car your gasoline powered car and buying an EV. That there's a substitute there. There's not electric grain dryers or solar powered grain dryers for us to use to make this work. BD Turner says not excited, more so they didn't care. And honestly, Brandon, good point. This who I'm thinking who that is. This is one of the examples where I think it was back in June where Minister Bobo said her words were, grain drying is an insignificant cost. So that, oh boy, did that get people whipped up. And that was at maybe at $30 a ton. Wait till that gets to $170 a ton. Boom, boom, boom. It's going to be, and he says it is, Brandon. Okay, hey Turner. That got people were very rightfully mad for sure. Absolutely. There's another comment here. Ward says revenue neutral to government means transfer between segments of taxpayers. You know, I made that comment on the Ryan Jesperson show last week, and I got some angry urban people mad at me. But I agree. Yes, there is some that really define this as a bit of a wealth transfer. Taking money, the emitters or companies, taking their carbon taxes paid and distributing them to individual voters. So I hear you on that argument. James says carbon tax might be revenue neutral to the government, but not us farmers. Exactly, James. I agree. Horse Lake Ranch says GST on top of the carbon tax, not neutral at all. Yeah, taxes don't feel very neutral, do they? Not at all. It's one of those things. You guys are hitting it right on the dime for sure. Okay. So we talked about the responsibilities. He's going to go to middle of government. The other thing that I found interesting, and I didn't have a lot of time to discuss with him, is when he mentioned we have to decide where there are inequities. It would be interesting to know how they determine whether or not an industry is facing inequities of the treatment. I wonder if that's like a moving target. Depends on the sector. Is it a sector that typically, is on side with the current government? That was one where I wish I had a little bit more time. I would have asked him how to figure that out. Jacob, watching on YouTube, has a question. How much is the carbon tax a ton? I believe right now we're at $30, and we are escalating to $170 by 2030. Daryl has you guys lots of great questions. This is awesome. Keep them coming. This is fun, you guys. Do you think Mr. Carr has a strong enough voice in cabinet to sway anyone there? Well, okay, so that's a very good question, Daryl. I'm going to be the internal optimist. Okay, I'm not sure if there will be others that have more weight. So obviously, Chrystia Freeland is a big one. That's a big one for sure. Once you get past her, Carr's in that ballpark, is he not? Like, I wouldn't put Champagne in front of him. Wouldn't put Trade Minister Ning ahead of him. Like, so if we have a shot, this is a pretty good shot, isn't it? Like, I'm not saying it's going to work out. Like, I'm not saying that he's going to be 100% successful, because he kind of hedged his bet and say, I'm going to make the case, and it's up to others to listen. So he kind of hedged his bet on how effective he's going to be in convincing people of this. But if we're looking for a person to do it, this might be the guy. Okay, so that's why I was encouraged. That's why I felt kind of like, oh, okay, I like the way you put that. And yes, champagne is very tasty. I was, of course, talking about a different champagne, Daryl, but you know that for sure. Let's play clip number 3. This is about BRM reform. And then we'll keep hopping here with all of your questions, because this is a lot of fun. I'm really glad you guys are hanging in there, and we're doing this together, because this is an important interview, important topics, and I really appreciate you tuning in. Let's get to clip number 3.
There are other issues that face the agricultural industry in the prairie, including Agri-Stability. I'm sure you're aware of it.
Yes.
And we're trying to persuade provinces to match some money, $100 million that the government of Canada has put on the table. It requires matching at 40% from 2/3 of the producing provinces. So we're very hopeful that the prairies will come alongside. It really would be a shame to leave that money on the table.
Yeah, so Minister Babeau has been working very, very hard on this file, trying to convince the three prairie ag ministers to jump on board. Have you had discussions with the premiers of those three provinces to try to work that side of the equation?
I've had discussions with ministers across the prairie, some ag ministers, some economic development ministers. They understand where we're at. And I think that they have heard, or at least I hope they have, from the producer groups who are very strongly in favor of these changes to the program. And I hope that at the end of the day, the prairie premiers and their ministers of finance will understand that this is a federal provincial initiative that's going to land in the pockets of farmers when they need it, and an example of governments understanding that by working together we can soften the blow of these downturns. So I'm hopeful, and I'm also aware that those producer groups and those stakeholders who will be impacted by these changes are in touch with their politicians provincially. So are we. Op-ed pieces have been written, including by me, and we'll continue to make the arguments and hope for the best.
Do you know why the three prairie provinces are yet to say yes? BC, Quebec, Ontario have. COVID has been used as one of the reasons from an expense standpoint. Are you aware of what's at the root of this disagreement?
Shaun, you'd have to ask them, but I'd be surprised if it was anything other than money.
Cold hard cash being in the way, and Mr. Carr is correct. The three prairie provinces have talked about their hurdle here is, their COVID expenses and the costs, government's not being in good shape financially, and they're still looking. We had a deadline the end of December. We had a deadline at the end of January. Both those deadlines, we have blown through them, and we're still kind of left hanging where we were previously. And I don't know about you all out there, but I find it quite disappointing. I think this is something that, yeah, sure, like we need to go back home, we need to think about it and look at it, but when we're talking about, 15, $18 million a year, really in the grand scheme, and that's not even a guaranteed, you don't even have to necessarily have to pay that money. That's if there's a wreck. So you look at grain farmers, do you think there's a high probability that grain farmers are going to need an Agri-Stability payout in 2021? We've got old crop canola at about just under $700. Now, the livestock side, that may be different. This is where I think it gets a little bit tough for provinces like Saskatchewan to hold out much longer on this. The beef industry got a lot of what they asked for. One of those things was getting rid of the reference margin. So they need two of the three provinces, and this is one where I think they've got some explaining to do if they don't step up and accept the proposal that has been laid out. We know that Alberta, Minister Dreeshen, is like super hyper laser focused on his the next framework, and he's really been pushing the margin insurance program. Danny says, if the prairies don't take this Agri-Stability change, then I question if they actually care about agriculture. That's Danny's thought. Lindsay says, money, 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 money. Danny talks about the cream principle. I have no clue what he is talking about from Grayson, Saskatchewan. Can you please donate us to us poor farmers? I think Daryl's talking to somebody else in the chat, and I've missed the beginning of that. Oh, I think he's talking to Lindsay. She says she raises sheep, Daryl. I have no extra dollars. Yeah, that's yeah, no kidding. Danny says it has to do with the Wu-Tang. I'm not a Wu-Tang fan. I'm not getting your inside joke on that one. My question is, how long can COVID be the cover? Really, and I mean that sincerely. We see the federal government doing this. We see provincial governments doing this where it's, COVID. Like, how long? And I'm not saying that there hasn't been extreme costs, and that is not the number one concern. Like when I didn't play the clip, but when I had Carr on, I asked him, what is your main focus right now as the special representative of the prairies? And he said, well, number one is COVID and dealing with the pandemic. Brennan says COVID can be the cover as long as COVID is around. So I guess maybe it's just that absolutely, maybe it's that simple, I guess. I don't know. It's at some point they're going to have to move on. Danny says, hey, cash rules everything around me. It's kind of the way it happens with life. Brennan says it's a crisis, easy to deflect when there's a crisis. Yeah, absolutely, man. I agree with you. And if you look at right now, the vaccine rollout, it's not going super well. There's a lot of finger pointing, upstream, downstream. We got the provinces blaming the feds kind of blaming the vaccine manufacturers. There's been this huge overstatement as well. Obviously the vaccine manufacturers overpromised on what they could deliver. There's a lot of pushback on Trudeau and, hey, you know what, you failed us on this and you signed contracts and you should have. Where's the vaccines? The reality is those vaccine manufacturers signed those contracts too, and they have not delivered on it. So I think there should be more attention to that. What do we got going on in the chat here? We've got Daryl says it's probably time to work towards the next cap or whatever we call it next and develop actual BRMs that work for every sector of our industry. Enough time wasted on Agri-Stability. So Daryl, no doubt. But this, when you say that, I think back to my discussion with Ernie Hardeman, who's the Minister of Agriculture in Ontario. This is the week after that FTP meeting, okay? And I asked, and Ontario's in on this revision. And they're also in on creating the new cap framework. So one of the things that Hardeman had said to me is, listen, we can do both. Like, why can't we do both? Why can't we make some changes, what we think are fixes to the Agri-Stability program, and also work on the new framework? Like, why are those two things mutually exclusive from each other, and why can't they happen at the same time? That's the question. That's the point that Hardeman made to me when we talk about that. So I absolutely agree. Why not work on the next framework, which I think comes due in 2023? So we are not that far away. And but does that mean they don't accept these changes? I don't know. They've got to come up with a bit better example of that. Like Danny says, you got to do both, walk and chew gum at the same time. Danny says, I agree with Daryl, but it might be 5+ years before they agree to a new cap. They better get started. The way they can't agree on this change to the Agri-Stability, they better get fired up and get working on it. This reminded me of a U.S. Farm Bill negotiation where you sign the Farm Bill and then you just start working on the next one that comes out in 5 years. Yes, Lindsay is saying I'm correct. The Ag Policy Framework, the new version rolls out in 2023. James makes the point, I agree, so sick of the COVID excuse. This government has way too many agricultural balls up in the air. There's a lot to juggle. There's no question about that. Absolutely. Danny brings up a good point. Vaccines might actually bring this government down. That's one of the questions we talked about in the radio show today on RealAg Radio. You're going to hear it at 4:30 Eastern in an hour. One of the things we mentioned was about the election. Will he call a spring election? I think will he do it prior to us getting to that September date that he has promised? In that Carr interview that you can find at realagriculture.com, Mr. Carr promises, we will have everyone vaccinated in September. We're behind. We're going to get there. The numbers are not indicating that. They've got some real catch-up to do, a real rally in the back half of the ball game, so to speak, to make it all happen. The analogy to the U.S. Farm Bill is healthy. Seems like politics and country has become more divided under the current regime. Yeah, there's definitely some politics at play here, Daryl. That's the part Brendan. We've asked a lot of questions, like the why of this. Like, I get the sense, and this is sort of my thinking, that COVID is a cover for this, okay? It's not, the money is not the issue. They've done a very good job of making it sound like it's $15 billion and not $15 million. And the three prairie provinces, it's really unclear why they are appearing to band together on this. Dreeshen being the most resolute, and Merritt and Peterson being a lot quieter on it, and nobody really knows where they're going to go on it. You talk to some of the farm groups; there hasn't been a lot of communication back and forth, and even I've heard even communication amongst those three ministers. So it is really, really a quiet zone. What do we got here? Oh, Daryl's got a question down. You can't answer a question with a question, Daryl. I think there's rules against that. The question to the question is another question. If Saskatchewan and Alberta accept this deal, where does the money come from? Crop insurance research, places where ROI is higher for farmers. So, yeah, that's a good question, Daryl. That was there's a number of farmers that have asked me that question. And so, do they steal money from other parts of the program to fund the Agri-Stability part? And does things like crop insurance get hurt? We saw Alberta drop the crop insurance premium by 20%. I've had viewers mention to me that's like a savings. I think it was $55 million. That $55 million would easily have covered. Why didn't they take that premium from crop insurance and apply it to the Agri-Stability change? Because that $55 million would have definitely covered the multi-year commitment of the Agri-Stability change. So there's a lot of unanswered questions when it comes from this, for sure. I encourage you to go to realagriculture.com. I posted the full video interview there, and continue to let us know what you think. Do you think I'm being too optimistic? Am I putting too much hope in Jim Carr to sit down with Prime Minister Trudeau and say, "Listen here, JT, we got to make some changes"? Could that happen? I don't know. It's a shot. What's our other alternative? Right? You got a better strategy. We need some friends in this topic, because the traditional route that we have gone, it is. And Brendan says JT won't even sit down with Jim Carr. Oh, come on. I'm not that negative on the whole thing. They'll sit down. They'll have a scotch. I promise you. What do you got here? JT won't sit down with anyone on the other side of the House of Commons. Well, they're on the same side. They're on the same side. They're both liberals. They're in cabinet. It's you let me know. Am I being too optimistic? Do you think I got my head up my ass, so to speak, on this one? Am I just hoping instead of really looking at things from a reality standpoint? We'll see. I think it's worth a shot. We need one. If the carbon tax continues to go up, we got to get that addressed. And I'm not even sure if it stops with grain drying exemptions. There's probably some other areas we need to have looked at where there isn't a substitute. And I also think we got to pay attention when it comes to this carbon policy. We're seeing, North American energy strategy. Where is the alignment between Canada and the U.S. on a lot of these items when it comes to carbon offsets? We talked about that last week, where the Canadian government is going to be rolling out this program for carbon offsets, where private industry is going to step in and try to make some offers to pay you for your carbon sequestration. There's a lot of farmers pretty cynical, I would say, or just they need to show me the money, so to speak, whether or not I should be excited about that. The U.S. farmer being fed some of the same sort of details. It'd be some of the same companies looking to buy some of those credits. In the U.S., there's also the fact the U.S. government is going to be buying some of those credits potentially, if they get it approved, to use those funds out of the CCC. The CCC is the Commodity Credit Corporation that also funded some of those ad hoc payments. So although there may not be ad hoc payments in the U.S. in the next year based on the recovery, we could see some of those same funds get filtered to farmers in the U.S. via carbon credits. So that's something to pay attention to as well. No, okay. Brandon says, no, your head is up your ass. No, up your ass, but too optimistic. Okay. My head is not up my ass. So that's good. I appreciate that, Brandon. Absolutely. Okay. I think we need to do more Freestyle Fridays. If you agree, let me know. I don't want to make the assumption, but I think we had a lot of fun here today. I think this is a lot of fun, having a Freestyle Friday, kind of covering a couple topics, getting your participation, your feedback. You know what would be a lot of fun? A lot of fun would be where some people can actually, I'll give you the link, and you can hop in and we can really freestyle it. Wouldn't that would be fun too. I think we could. That would be really, really good. Horse Lake Ranch says the best strategy is just get rid of the liberals. Brennan, first time participant and showed up late. Hey man, we appreciate you showing up and having some fun. So let me know if you like this Freestyle Friday. It is this is kind of what it's all about. RealAg Live streaming every weekday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 o'clock Mountain, and really getting you involved on some of these issues and trying to create awareness around some of the important stuff that's happening in our industry. We're truly committed to giving you the insight on what those issues are and getting your thoughts on it too, and really kind of building out that conversation. That the more information all of us have, we're really, really learning together, and I think that's a big, big, big time benefit. Hey, I really appreciate everybody. Thanks for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. Don't forget to tune into RealAg Radio today, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. It's about 45 minutes from now. You can also download the podcast of the radio show as well at realagradio.com or on iTunes. Hey, have a great time, everybody. Have a great weekend. If you're not getting, I think most of us are getting some snow. Enjoy it. Super Bowl, Chiefs are winning by 10. I said it. Talk to you guys later. Cheers.